right. Well, I think we have a quorum. We'll go ahead and get started. Again, thank you for joining us. This is Jeff Foley and my much better half, Nikki Foley, here with us. And this is part of our quarterly educational approach that we use with our clients and anyone that wants to listen in. So we do a quarterly webinar on different topics. Today, we're excited to talk about buckets. If you're a client of ours, and I see a number of you on here, we like to talk about buckets in our meetings, and you see some drawings on the board over and over again. And we're going to talk about creating buckets to help fund your bucket list. So today's going to be all about buckets that we're going to dig into. And webinar will last around 40-45 minutes, somewhere in that range. And we're going to jump right in here. So first of all, a phrase that many of you might be familiar with, YOLO, or you only live once, is a mentality of let's just live our life, and whatever comes, we'll figure it out, sort it out somewhere down the road. Versus reality is we all have bills to pay, and you want to make sure as you prepare for and navigate retirement, you have enough to live throughout your retirement. So we're going to talk about how those two things compete. Buckets, again, we're going to talk about buckets from a few different perspectives to kind of drive this point home. Is if you look at your assets in terms of accumulating money, preserving the money, and using those assets for income, we're going to talk about some strategies there. Another approach is looking at it in terms of the time horizon of when you need those assets, so short, medium, and long. And we also want to look at how each of the buckets you have is taxed. So for example, an IRA is taxed differently than a Roth IRA. We'll then transition into talking about bucket lists, which is a lot more fun than talking about buckets, and end with some community announcements. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Nikki, who's going to talk about YOLO.
All right, thank you, Jeff, and hello to everybody. So when I put this slide in here, hashtag YOLO, Jeff, I'm certain, cringed a little bit and said multiple times to me, do we really have to put that in there? Gosh, I hate that phrase. And we left it. But point being, and he should feel good about this, it was made famous by a rapper named Drake. But here's what he'll appreciate is that it is not as popular as it once was, doesn't get used as much of it as it used to. But point being is the philosophy is still strong. And as Jeff had mentioned in his intro there, the power should be used for good. And so we want to talk about where you want to go and some of the things that you're excited about as you are progressing through life. Some of you may be already entering into retirement where you have the world at your hands and you get to spend your time doing what you want to be doing. So Jeff, if you'll go to the next slide, I have an activity to get us started here. And it was, so this is what we understand, that it was made famous by our legend, Warren Buffett of Berkshire Hathaway. And so here's the philosophy behind it is not only do you get to make a master bucket list, but you really narrow in and have laser-like focus on your top 5 things. And so for those of you that are comfortable doing this, there is a handout section in your menu. Typically that's off to the right-hand side, and you should see handouts. And there you can actually download this. I made this really simple on you that you can type, it's fillable, you can type right in it. So if you want to, as we're moving through this presentation and you're starting to think about the things that might be on your bucket list, you can actually fill this out as you go. Again, that's in the handout section in the menu for the GoToWebinar there. In the event that you don't see it, we'll certainly get it to you afterwards and make sure you have it in your hands. But the point is this. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I was going to say that I have to share with everyone that Nikki introduced me to this this approach. We went out to dinner at the end of a long week, and she said, "Let's make our 25 bucket list." And I groaned a little bit. Oh my gosh, I don't want to do that. And it only takes about 10 minutes or so, so you'll get rolling pretty quickly.
Yeah, I did make Jeff do this at a sushi restaurant on a Saturday night. Probably not what he was thinking about for date night, but nonetheless, we got through it, each one of us. So if you do have that available, the point is this, that you write down your 25 items on your bucket list, then you narrow it to your top 5. And that's what those check marks are for on the right-hand side. And the point is you have laser-like focus on those top 5 things. And the other 20, you put those to the side until you've accomplished your top 5, and then you turn around and you mark 5 more until you get through your list of 25. Some may have done this or heard of making your 100 bucket list. And so if you get enthusiastic about this and you're really enjoying it, you can certainly do this, in multiple times, getting to 100 as well. So Jeff, if you'll go ahead and go to the next slide. Again, I encourage everybody to do that. So at this point, we focused on creating your bucket list, narrowing in so that you have laser-like focus on 5 things. But guess what happens then? Your brain gets in the way. And what does your brain tell you? It tells you all the reasons why this isn't possible. And so most people expect to be told you can't go to the Beyonce concert because it's too expensive. And maybe that quote right there, instead of Beyonce, should be replaced with Taylor Swift and her tour that she's had over the last several months here. Or you can't go on that dream vacation, or just save it. That's what you're supposed to be doing, making sure that you have all your money available so that you don't outlive it. Well, let's make sure that we don't let our brain get in the way, because typically what happens is it falls back for a majority of people on the finances aren't there to make it happen. And we did this, this is supported by an article from Reuters saying 57% or a majority of people say their finances are the reason that they haven't been able to check some of the items off their bucket list. Well, our goal today is to figure out and get excited about the things that you want to do, give you the tools to take actions and the steps to do that. And so nobody better to help you along the way than Mr. Jeff Foley, our financial professional here. And what does he have to say about how we make this possible?
Yeah, one of the common questions we get is people often ask about different rules of thumb that are out there. And personally, I'm biased a little bit. I'm not a big fan of rules of thumb because I've seen too many times in many situations people use those inappropriately, and it doesn't factor in all the moving parts that apply to a person's situation. But they do give us a good starting point, something simple that we can start with and expand from there. So a common one is the 4% rule, which is an age-old study, goes back to the early 90s, that was the result of a big study done by Morningstar to answer the question, what's a safe withdrawal rate that you could take out of your investments and have a pretty high likelihood that that would last you throughout retirement? So for years, lots of people have used that 4% rule. What many don't know is that study was redone in 2013, and they adjusted that to the 2.8% rule. Quite a bit of a jump or drop in that. It's about a 32% decrease. So it's you want to be careful in using any type of rule of thumb. Make sure it applies to your situation. Another common one is the rule of 100, where you take 100 minus your age. So if you're 65 years old, 100 minus 65 says you should have 65% of your assets in stocks, for example. So there are different moving parts that apply to that. We use a tool called the color of money risk analysis. It's similar to that rule of 100. It gives us a starting point on what risk should you take with your investments based on a combination of your risk tolerance and your resources. So there are a number of those out there that you can use as a starting point, but again, we want to dial that in and make sure you have a good comprehensive plan that applies to you and your situation. So we're digging in a little bit further than those rules of thumb. So we'll wrap up and talk a little bit more about the bubbles that you see on the screen here, but our approach at Paladin, and we encourage you to do this if you're handling these matters yourself, is to look at beyond those rule of thumb, how am I prepared in all of these different areas to support my goals and dreams, the bucket list that we're talking about here today, and make sure you're thinking through all of these things from different perspectives. So how do you reduce or eliminate certain types of risk? How do you create income in retirement, which we'll touch on here with the buckets in a moment? Tax planning, how do you minimize taxes not only today, but throughout the years? So there's so many factors that play into this. Now, one simple way of looking at your assets and tying in the buckets is looking at the phases of when that money is going to be used. So you have your accumulation phase, which generally is earlier in life, where you're saving money, you're putting money into your 401k at work, you have an IRA you're contributing to every year, you're building up those assets over time, and when you plan on using those is somewhere down the road. So because of that longevity for those assets, you're generally able and willing to maybe take on more risk with those assets compared to an emergency fund. You next, as you're getting closer to retirement or when you might use an asset, look at the preservation phase. So closer to retirement or closer to whenever you might need to use that asset for income, now we're going to scale that back and look at how do I save that, keep it safer, and have a shorter time horizon on the use of those assets. The third phase is when you actually start to take income out of those assets. So a different bucket. That might be for retirement income needs. It might be for college funding. It might be for legacy. Maybe you're gifting assets in your later years. So each of those phases needs to be looked at and thought through. Kind of putting a visual to this with the accumulation phase, you have your income coming in from work or business, whatever you're doing. You have your living expenses, you're paying off the house, raising kids and so forth, and you're building up your savings that you see on the right. When you transition into the income phase and you drop below that line that you see on your screen, the savings that you've used or built up over the years now have to be used to create the income on the right side. So the tables have turned when you switch into income. So in the middle there, you have to look at what's the market doing, am I keeping pace with inflation and taxes and expenses and so forth, and put some good thought into creating income along the way. That preservation phase that we talked about is a little bit different in that you're using a portion of your savings and you want to take less risk with that, steadier, more predictable, because it's not going to be very long before you'll need to use those assets for income. So we want to think of every dollar has a purpose and making sure you know what phase of that cycle that the asset is coming into play. Why that might be important, and we look on the preservation phase, you see the reference to the sequence of returns risk. By being more conservative in that preservation phase, we want to reduce one of the most important risks that retirees and pre-retirees have, and that's what you see on the screen. So let's say you had $500,000, doesn't matter the dollar amount, but you had $500,000 and you don't touch that money for 20 years, you just let that stay invested in the market. On investment A that you see here, this shows us the annual rates of return throughout those 20 years, okay? That $500,000 has now grown to about 2.6 million. If you look at investment B, you're starting with 500,000, but the returns are reversed. So the first year for investment B is down 28%, which is the same as the last year on investment A. Doesn't matter the order that you put those returns in, you're going to end with about $2.6 million in that example. When you cross that line and you move from accumulating money into using it for income, it's a very different ballgame. If you have $500,000, let's say at the beginning of retirement, but now you're pulling out $25,000 a year, and that $25,000 has to grow to keep pace with inflation. You have the same two investments, A and B, the returns are flip-flopped. If you look at the end of investment A, at the end of that 20 years, you still have money left. It's grown to about 1.5 million based on that sequence of returns. Investment B, if we zoom in here for the last year, it ended up in the hole. So you ran out of money with investment B because that sequence of returns, when are you having negative years and you're still pulling out money in retirement, that's going to have a big impact on that outcome. So we want to be aware of this risk, and then what do we do to put a plan in place to reduce that? And that's where we enter in and look at buckets from a different perspective.
Fantastic. And so buckets, we've just went through the three phases of, going from the accumulation to the preservation to the income phase. Now, how do we manage and hedge against some of those risks that Jeff talked about? So we use bucket planning, and this is something that's not exclusive to our organization, but something that's a fairly popular planning mechanism out there. And so it's how you plan for distributing that income using short, medium, and long-term buckets. One of the things that's important for us is that we aren't moving through draining each one of those buckets, but rather we're using all three buckets over the course of your life and maintaining that on a recurring basis based on the purpose and your time horizon that we're looking at. And so, Jeff, if you'll go to the next slide, we're going to go through these in just a little bit more detail. But if you look at the short-term bucket, the purpose of that is to be covering for the immediate. And when we talk about the immediate, we're looking really at 0 to 24 months. Terminology that you might be comfortable with or used to hearing is having that emergency fund or your expenses allocated for. That would be something that would be in your short-term bucket. Now, this bucket is not likely to keep pace with inflation. And so there's very little exposure to the market that goes along with this. So again, it's for planned expenses, emergencies, it's safer, it's liquid, you have access to it. So where would your you only live once or your bucket list fit into this? Well, it might fit into this bucket as part of your planned expenses. If you'll go to the next one, it's that medium term bucket. And this is where we're looking at, if you want to put years on it, probably that 3 to 7 year time frame of when you're going to need those funds. So you need it sooner than later, and you need to have some growth so that you hedge against that inflation concern or that sequence of return that Jeff went through a couple slides ago. So income is important, but so is growth when you're looking at this medium term bucket. Conservative so that you can hedge against inflation. And then we move into that longer term time frame. This is where you have an opportunity to look for long-term growth, and you have higher growth opportunities. And so it allows you to take advantage of knowing that you have those previous buckets in place with the short and the medium term risk, where you can use this pocket of money potentially for higher growth opportunities. So other things that fit into this bucket is being mindful of the long term. So this is 7+ years, and things that might need to be planned for, like long-term care planning, inheritance, and legacy planning might fall into this as well. All right.
How we apply that too, if you have an IRA account, let's say you only have one IRA account and no other assets, couple options would be to break that IRA into 3 different accounts. So you have a short, medium, and long term. Or what we do is we're able to, within that same IRA account, break that out and have different portfolios with different strategies and risk level and income needs within that same IRA to simplify that. A lot of times when people come in to meet with us for a complimentary second opinion, we look at their investments and everything's grouped together. It's shoved in one thing, and it's hard to use that properly in good and bad markets to create the income that you need. So I want to make sure that's thought through. Another way to look at buckets is from a tax perspective, and we're big advocates of being diversified from a tax perspective. It's likely tax rates are going up over time. If we were to poll everybody that's on here today, I think most people would raise their hands and say, yep, I think taxes are going up. So we want to be aware of that. The tax law that we have in place now expires at the end of 2025. Taxes are scheduled to likely increase at that point. And you also want to look at what your income is planning to do as well. Are you going to start collecting Social Security and pension? Required minimum distributions are a big thing as well to be aware of. So we want to do what we can do to control what we can with the assets that we have. So a big piece of that is the tax side of it. One of my favorite phrases is a low tax year is a terrible thing to waste. You don't want to necessarily brag that I didn't pay much in taxes or I got a refund. It's what is going to happen long term. This is not a 1-year sprint. It is a marathon in terms of lowering your overall tax bill. And that's where we spend a lot of time and effort in digging in with our clients to help to do that. So with your buckets, from a tax perspective, you have taxable assets, so a CD, for example, or a brokerage account, your savings account, any interest that's occurring within that bucket, any growth that's occurring in that bucket, you pay taxes on that each year, even if you're not taking the money out of the bucket. So you want to be aware of what you have that's taxable. For most people, the biggest bucket is tax deferred assets. So you received a tax deduction, pouring money into that bucket over decades, perhaps. That money has grown tax deferred, but you have any money that you take out of that, you're going to pay income taxes on it. And when you get to retirement age, your required minimum distributions, either age 73 or 75 for most people on here, you're forced to take money out of that and pay the taxes. And then finally, you have tax-free assets. So your Roth money, your HSAs, and certain cash value life insurance, if it's done properly, you can pull money out of that bucket tax-free. So there are rules around that. So you want to be aware of what you have in your buckets from a tax perspective and how do you adjust that over time to reduce the tax bill. So if we couple these two concepts together, you have the short, medium, and long-term buckets that we talked about, and you also have how is that bucket taxed. It's really a 9-bucket plan that you have. You could have 9 buckets in your retirement plan. So when it comes to, I need to take money out of these accounts for whatever it might be, the example you see on here is a new car, monthly bills, whatever it might be, we want to look at how is that bucket invested, the money we're going to take out, how is it invested, and how is it taxed? And in certain situations, we're actually going to jump over the short and medium term buckets and pull out of the longer term bucket first if we're in a year where the market is up quite a bit and the investments that are more aggressive in that long-term bucket have had some good returns. We might want to take some of that off the table and take that out as income before the market goes down. So we're going to adjust where we're pulling that from over time. And we also want to look at the tax component as well. What we strive to do for our clients is to help drive more of that money to become tax-free throughout the years, depending on your situation. And for most people, with tax rates are going up and their income is going up, let's be aggressive in trying to move more of that to tax-free. So those are some of the ways that we want to look at the planning from a bucket perspective to make sure you get the most out of every dollar that you have.
Fantastic. And so this is one of Jeff's quotes that he found recently, and he keeps coming back to it, and we thought it was worth sharing. So if the ladder is not leaning against the right wall, every step we take just gets us to the wrong place faster. And the point being is starting where we, starting with what do you want, using that master bucket list as your guidepost of where you want to go, and then making sure that each step we take is headed in the right direction to help us aim towards those top 5 things we want to accomplish. So if you go to the next slide there, again, this is sometimes where the brain starts to get in the way, but it is part of the planning process. Is you want to start applying what do some of those financials numbers look like as you look at your master bucket list. And some of you may be very familiar with that bucket list and what you're trying to accomplish and how much that might cost you. Others, this might be a new project and you need some guidance on what some of these things might cost you. So from that study or from that article that we had referenced earlier, the average maximum we're willing to spend in order to fulfill a lifelong dream is somewhere right around that $3,100 or that $3,000 range, which might put sticker shock on some of you, or some of you might say, "Ooh, that's a lot cheaper than I was expecting for some of my dreams." Well, if you go to the next slide, let's have some perspective, and this is what happens when your brain starts to get in the way here. You're like, my gosh, for me to do my top 5, that would cost me $15,000. Can I afford that? Or what if I do that, all those things on my top 25 list? All of a sudden we're at, $77,000. And then what if my wife or my spouse or my significant other wants to do theirs too? Is it even possible that we could afford this? And then you kind of get this wah, wah, wah. Maybe not possible to even get there. And what if you do? I have 100 things on your bucket list. If you go to the next slide, Jeff, again, your brain gets in the way and it says 15,000 is not an option, and no way is taking that times 100 of getting us to, over 600,000. Stop and relax and take this with how can we accomplish the things that we're looking for? And let's rewind. Let's talk about where financial professionals started us today with the bucket concept and taking time to set aside some of those resources that you've been working really hard for and putting them in the right bucket based on when you want to accomplish these. It also helps to have a professional on your side, especially if you're having some of those conversations with a significant other or a spouse, to say, is this possible? And have we made a plan that allows us to make this a reality? And then getting this one step further, don't forget that not all 25 or 100 things on your bucket list have to come in that average. There are a lot of things that, fit more into accomplishing a personal goal. And so also the mindset of, if you are spending $3,000 or whatever that number is, are you making an investment in yourself? And so are you bettering your education that could relate to or result in a higher income in the future? So thinking about what that number looks like if you're trying to accomplish personal goals as well and growing yourself. And then I have a couple stories for you. Getting creative and volunteering and using your gifts. The Super Bowl was here in Minneapolis in 2017, I believe it was. And we had a good friend of ours that, of course, she wanted to go to the Super Bowl. Guess what she did? She volunteered for a catering company that was supporting the suites at the stadium and was able to be at the Super Bowl. Not only was she able to be at the Super Bowl, but she was able to serve a lot of the parties that were going around leading up to the evening. And she was able to get a glimpse or two of some famous people. And so it was a whole experience for her simply because she agreed to work with a catering company. And it was a different way of being a part of the experience, but nonetheless, she got to accomplish one of the goals on her bucket list. Another one, we have a good friend that we actually work with here in the building, and he's a huge Twins fan. Well, he can't afford or doesn't want to spend all of his money on season tickets to the Twins game. So similar concept is he volunteers or he works part-time at the Twins stadium so that he can go to the games. And a final one, for those that are a little bit younger, there's an opportunity out there. If you're paying back student loans, you can actually work at a lot of these sporting events that will pay back your student loans for you. So not only are you accomplishing maybe a goal of getting student loans off the bucket list, but you're also getting to go to some of the games and things that are of entertainment. So use your gifts. Think about how volunteering or a part-time job could play into this. Jeff, if you'll go to the next slide. And so back to where we started on that one is making sure that you have a solid financial plan in place and having a professional or a partner alongside of you, knowing what the plan is. So making some of the decisions to pull the trigger on doing your bucket list items, it comes much easier when you have a plan in place and a professional on your side. We talked about part-time work, volunteering, consulting might fit into this. And then I have to bring up the sidebar conversation because one of the most popular items that we're hearing right now in our conversations with prospective clients, annual reviews, is this conversation about real estate. And it comes up in a couple different forms. One of the things that's on some bucket list is affording a second home, whether it's a cabin here in maybe Minnesota or Wisconsin, or you're looking to escape during the winter and you're heading to Texas or Florida or Arizona or who knows where. How about that second home? Or it's really a popular thing right now for generations, doesn't matter where you fit in, is to look for passive income through the VRBO and the Airbnb side of things. And even the concept of reverse mortgagers have really become more popular in the last few years. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Foley here to have his professional opinion on some of this and this sidebar conversation we're hearing.
Yeah, we're having a lot of questions from people over the last couple of years, more and more questions than ever about real estate from different perspectives. And I like to think first that this is a lifestyle decision and a financial decision. So the lifestyle decision, let's say you decide you want to use real estate, you're going to buy a property and it's going to become a rental for you. You now have two places that you need to manage and stay on top of. And depending on what your life looks like, that might be a good idea or not so good idea. So I think about Nikki and I right now. We have two young kids, business, busy, et cetera. Having another property is something that we don't have any interest in at this point, but that might change somewhere down the road. So some risk and reward to think about with this. Risk, if you're not yet having purchased a property, interest rates could change and more interest rate rises in the future, although probably slower than what we've seen over the last year. That's something you want to be aware of in planning through this. Rental growth has also slowed and might decline depending on the area of the city and country. Maintenance costs, things are not getting cheaper. Although inflation is slowing, it's not deflation. We're not going backwards. So getting those repairs done on a property more and more expensive, even if you're doing it yourself, are more costly. Threat of economic downturn that could impact the value of the real estate and the ability to rent it. Not all real estate investments create passive income, and that's what a lot of people are interested in that ask about real estate, and we help them to think through different transactions or options. Passive income is something people are very interested in, but not all real estate creates that. Low inventory makes it more challenging. We had a client that stopped in the office yesterday. They put up their house on the market, didn't even get listed with MLS. They sold their house within 4 hours. It wasn't even out there in the public. So that can make that more difficult for you to find the right type of property. But the rewards can be very good as well. So returns are long-term. If you look at a single family home, they're comparable to stock market returns. But like any investment, whether it's investing in a particular company's stock or buying a $200,000 property, you want to be aware of not just what that investment can do for you, but the concentration risk you have putting a lot of money into that, liquidity. Those are some things to think about. Rental homes can hedge against inflation. So if inflation goes up, rental prices go up as well. Property values have a history of increasing after economic downturns. So looking at when you're purchasing, low affordability for people buying homes helps keep people renting longer, which is good if you're the one that's renting the property. Also creates business opportunities where you can have write-offs for different expenses you already have. So a lot of things that you can look at that real estate might be a good way for you to utilize that. And a simple way of analyzing what would this investment look like for me is calculating that return on investment. So if you look on the screen here, you take your annual return in terms of your income. In this example, let's say $36,000 a year of rental income. And let's say you paid $360,000 for that property. That's a 10% ROI. Now you can get into the weeds. Well, what about expenses? What about taxes and so forth? And kind of look at that ROI from different perspectives. But that gives you a good, simple starting point. If you see that number being at 10% or more, that might be a good investment to look at. So you also want to look at this in terms of your lifestyle, tying in the buckets. If your goal is to have a property in Florida and snowbird to that along the way and maybe rent that out when you're not there, that could help to make some, good decisions for you. If you're in peak weeks, let's say you're renting that out for $1,400 a week and your goal is to get $36,000 of income from that property, you can do that pretty quickly and potentially pay that property off very quickly and so forth. So looking at how you want to have that real estate tie into your bucket list that we talked about later and make sure that it makes good sense for you. How we approach things in helping our clients to think through all the stuff that we're touching on here today is we have a process of success. All of our clients have what's called the Paladin Plan, where we see the 5 steps on the left there. That's the process that we go through, and we're always going through those 5 steps because something in your life or the world around us is going to change, whether it's politics, elections, taxes, and so forth. We want to make sure your plan is live and up to date. And the bubbles that you see around the center being you, these are all the areas that we address as part of our planning process that we're looking at each time we get together with our clients. And intentionally last here is the investments and how those are used to fund your bucket list, to help reduce any concerns you have about your retirement, make sure you're not paying too much in taxes, and you've got a good solid plan throughout the years. So benefits of that relationship. So even for those of you that are clients with us currently is call us if you have questions, if you're contemplating some big life change, whether it's retirement or moving to part-time or buying a property, give us a call and we can help you to think through that and monitor, is your plan up to date? Is it on track to help you to achieve your goals? And recognize you have a community here. So the webinars that we do, we have our podcast, Paladin Financial Talk. If you haven't checked that out, I encourage you to do that so you can hear about other experiences that people have that are going through similar things. We have the educational events that we host in our building as well. And we also have our one-on-one review meetings with our clients that we're there to help answer any questions you have. So the bottom line here is we're going to give you, beyond that rule of thumb, some of the rules of thumb that we talked about earlier, you're going to have a personalized plan. And for clients that are not yet retired, you're hopefully only going to retire once, but we retire many in terms of that's where we focus, is helping people to plan for retirement and navigate all the things financially and the emotions that come up as well throughout the year. So those are some of the ways that we can help you out.
Fantastic. And to expand a little bit on our community that Jeff touched on in that third bullet point there, we've made a big emphasis on making sure that we are continuing to educate you. And some of the topics that we gave you today, we'll spend more time as we talk about those in our podcast. As we talk about them, we now have our YouTube channel. We're constantly touching base on what's going on in the market through our social media feeds. And so we encourage you to follow along with us. Look for opportunities to continue to educate yourself through some of the items that you see on the screen here. Jeff, other things that we have going on right now, we're super excited to be able to announce that we now have not only Financial Paladin, but we also have paladinfinancial.com as our URL. So many of you may know the story behind what is a Paladin and how we came up with our name. But for those of you that are not familiar with that, Jeff, just go through really quickly, what is a Paladin and why we chose that?
Yeah, Paladin and Nikki, I think we're getting some feedback from your microphone when you were talking there. But a paladin is an advocate, a defender. It goes back to Roman times that were originally, there were 12 paladins that were trusted advisors to the emperor way back when. So that's why our logo is a shield. Our goal is to help protect our clients and their families and think through all these things, be another adult in the room with you to help make the most out of what you have today. So we're excited again to have the new website domain there.
Jeff, let me know if you're not hearing me well or if I am getting feedback. We're good?
Good.
All right.
Yeah.
So when we started the business, we didn't have the ability to get Paladin Financial. And so we thought, well, we're your financial paladin. It will only make sense. Sort of confusing. And so we're really excited to be able to have Paladin Financial as our new URL. Also, we just announced 2 weeks ago that we are going to be helping our community by giving up to 12 months of mortgage or rent payments to a deserving family. And so this is something that I have had the opportunity, and Jeff, and actually a number of our staff members have had the opportunity to be a part of this experience through our relationship with Gradient Financial Group and their foundation called Gradient Gives Back Foundation. And so we have made the commitment to do something in our community where we will be looking for a family that has been hit with something, typically that is medically related. It could be a domestic situation, but they are a good family. They are a hardworking family, but one thing has happened in their life or a series of things that have set them back, and they're having a hard time meeting their bills and their payments. And so we will be awarding up to 12 months of mortgage payments in this next coming year. So if you know families that might be in need of something like this, nominate them. Go to paladingivesback.com. Or you can also go to our new webpage there, and there's a community page on there. So Paladin Gives Back is where you can nominate somebody in need. All right, and with that, next steps. So back to that phrase that Jeff Foley does not like all that well, YOLO, or you only live once. You don't have to get caught up in whether that is the right thing to say or not right thing to say. Get caught up in the philosophy of taking action, taking a step towards something that you want on your bucket list. Download that bucket list handout if you haven't already. Start filling it out. Harness the power of our relationship so that you have a professional next to you that can have a plan with you and can help you accomplish the items that are on that list. So our phone number's up there, as well as our email address and a text. You can now text us at any time as well. We'd love to get back to you from that. So call us at 651-842-8406, and also look for a family that might be in need. Nominate them at paladingivesback.com. We're so glad that you joined us today. Hopefully you took one or two things away from our presentation. And Jeff, anything else you'd like to wrap up with today?
No, other than thank you and go fill your buckets.
All right, thanks. Take care. Call us if you need anything.
Thank you.